This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon.
I certainly empathize with Americans who are exhausted after 25 years of foreign entanglements in the Middle East. I understand the concern, but the difference is that back then we had dumb presidents, and now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's national security objectives. So this is not going to be some long, drawn-out thing. We've got in, we've done the job of setting their nuclear program back. We're going to now work to permanently dismantle that nuclear program over the coming years, and that is what the president has set out to do. Simple principle. Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That has animated American policy over the past 130 days. It's going to continue to be a driving force of our policy in the Middle East for the next 3.5 years.
When I heard bombs bursting in air this weekend in Oakland County, my first thought was, oh, it's a late Juneteenth celebration. Then I opened up Twitter. Then I turned on my TV. And then I saw that my president, Donald Trump, had bombed Iran. Today, I'd like to talk about the last war and the ways it's similar and different from the current war. It's not lost on me that right now, as I record this, I'm wearing a Make News Local Again shirt. When I was at the Detroit News, we had a saying whenever there was a big event in the world, that there is always a Michigan connection. At a local paper like the News, most of the job is reporting local events from a ground level perspective. And it's this that makes a Detroit paper different from a Chicago paper, different from a New York paper. But the other part of the job is localizing the news, which is to say taking national or even international storylines and applying it to the local context, fitting it in. And that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to localize the news. And there's no more powerful form of localizing the news than this. Asking how a story affects you, me, personally. Mel Brooks joked that a comedy is you slipping on a banana peel and dying. A tragedy is me getting a hangnail. It speaks to how we're wired as humans to care most about what happens to and around ourselves. You might think of yourself as a good person. The people who write and edit your news in Michigan absolutely think they're good people. And yet, tomorrow, if 10,000 people die in a mudslide in Indonesia, it would be and should be a small item on the nation and world page of your local paper. Whereas a single fatal car crash might make the front page. All these good people, and they're still as wired for human nature as the bad ones. Go figure that. As a Donald Trump voter, you'd like to think that the events last weekend do not affect you. But they do, and they will. And this feels like a good time to remind everybody that Trump, who's approaching 80, will never appear on another ballot again. Next year, I'm not sure if you've heard, we have a pretty important election in Michigan. I call it the ultimate battle for 2026, the loser leaves town match, the election that's going to decide, is Michigan going to be saved, or is Michigan going to be ruined forever by the Democrats? What's likely to happen in that election if the man you would crawl over glass to vote for, the man who claimed to be America first, got America knee-deep in a war with Iran? Trump's success last year owed to extreme popularity, coalition building, and a too-big-to-rig mentality that addressed the feeling Republicans had that the last two elections, 2020 and 2022, weren't quite right. And so too big to rig was the best way to respond to that. Rather than whine about it, you do something about it. You turn out your base. But all that goes out the window. All that fine wine turns into vinegar if this thing in Iran turns into more than just a flyby. Congress has already done its part to weaken the enthusiasm of Trump's base, and that's going to affect the election next year. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, came to Washington with excitement and a chainsaw, and he left with about 10% of the cuts he sought, none of which has been codified into law. Had the world's richest man left Washington satisfied, God knows how much he could have helped Republicans in the 2026 midterms. So when Congress sandbags the Trump agenda, it demoralizes his fans, starting with his biggest fan. I've said it for a long time now that Republicans betray their voters in two ways. The first is with unattractive public statements that make the average person walk away. That's why the media has tried to paint Trump with that brush ever since he took that escalator ride 10 years ago. They've used the same playbook on countless Republicans, including Mitt Romney. When Mitt Romney said in 2012 that he had binders full of women, what he meant was that those women were on his radar as a rich, wealthy guy who controls jobs and owns companies. They were on his radar for high level, high paying jobs. Mitt Romney wanted to hire women and had their resumes brought in by the binderful, and for this he was roasted and lampooned as a sexist. This is what they do every single time, and this is why they can't be met in the middle. They'll just bludgeon you when they get you there. But when Donald Trump said that places like Mexico don't send their best, it wasn't unattractive. It felt honest and true and crude in a way that's unusual for politics. Tucker Carlson wrote one of the most truthful articles I've ever read about Donald Trump. To this day, if I had to send someone one story about Donald Trump as we've known him in politics, I would send the Carlson article. It was headlined, "Donald Trump is shocking, vulgar, and right." Trump, after he came down that escalator, this wasn't Bill Clinton sniffing his way through a press conference, a single tear running down his cheek. This was Andrew Jackson-style plain talk, and the people loved him for it. But the second way Republicans betray their voters, which Trump is risking right now, is betrayal once in office. To bring it back to Michigan, after losing both houses of the legislature in the 2022 election, you know what the Republicans did on their way out the door? They funded the Q Line train in Detroit through 2039. So Gretchen Whitmer steals your gavels at the ballot box, and Republicans gift her a train set on their way out. Republicans cuck themselves so hard and so often that the average voter comes to think, shoot, we might as well have Democrats in charge. Then Democrats win, and then the cycle starts again. Democrats act so unhinged in office and do so much damage that a new crop of Republicans emerges, pledging common sense. In Michigan, it took us only 2 years of Democrats running everything in Lansing to realize that's not working. And so last November, the Michigan House was the only legislative body in America to flip to Republican control. Trump deserves part of that credit, sure, but most of it owes to the Republican voter. Something clicked and something flipped after that loss in 2022. You might not like the Republicans in Lansing or in Washington, and I'll be honest, I don't like most of them either. But any honest reading of events would tell you that even a bad Republican is a better choice than any Democrat. I view Democrats as if they are our suicidal Siamese twin. They don't just hate us, which would be bad enough, and that would be cause for alarm. But the real problem with the Democrats is they hate themselves. And then they turn that rage outward on the other 10 million of people. And when you give them power, they resent you for doing that. When Democrats did hold power for 2 years, they eliminated your right to work at an automaker without being a UAW member. They scrapped reading standards. They scrapped school grading systems. They closed down schools, and our kids and their test scores suffered for it. The Democrats are not a political party. They're a death cult. Everything they touch is made worse by their presence. Our suicidal Siamese twin is not well enough to hold the gavels or to control sharp objects. For their own sake, they need to be rendered mute in the halls of power so they can do what they actually prefer. Protest. Scream into the void. There are people you know, if you have friends who are Democrats, there are people you know who marched for Occupy Wall Street in 2012, Black Lives Matter in 2014, Pink Hats in 2017, Black Lives Matter again in 2020, Palestine last year, and No Kings this year. And those people think that you personally are a brainwashed jerk. And so it's your job as a merciful man, as one of the 8 billion children of God, to deny our friends the power they hate, and to give them instead the outsider status that they so crave. I say all that to say this. Yeah, what happened this weekend affects us, especially if it's widely read as a betrayal. The Trump coalition pulled in a lot of people who don't live for politics. In the business, they call them low propensity voters. Low propensity voters are the hardest people to turn out, but they're also the easiest people to turn off. And the easiest way to turn them off is if Donald John Trump, red letter rebel, were to turn into Donald W. Trump, warmonger. We saw a bad sign of that possibility this weekend. After the bombing strike, which was initially sold as a one and done, Trump tweeted, "It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be regime change?" Friends tell me, they assure me, that this was just Trump being Trump, that talk of regime change is just another negotiating tactic. I'd like to think so, but I fear that Trump is not here clever as a fox. I fear that he's too clever by half. Trump is such a strong marketer and such a successful guy that he thinks he can save any brand, whether it's the Republican Party or regime change. So many times Trump has done what others could not, that he now believes himself able to succeed where others did not. Taken far enough, that becomes pride, and that's always a mistake. So how does the news affect me? That's always the first question I ask. I don't look for a Detroit connection. I look for a James Dixon connection. How do things affect me? That's the first question you have to ask. Never let anybody talk you out of selfishness or self-interest, because it's only the most selfish, self-interested people who would even try to do that. They've turned nationalism into a four-letter word for exactly this reason, and to a large extent it has worked. The way the right talks about black nationalism, and talked about it at least during the Obama era, is the way the left talks about Christian nationalism now. But neither of those stigmas could have taken root if the concept of nationalism were itself not so stigmatized. Who told you it was stupid or silly or laughable to be proud of the one and only nation you call home? Seriously, how did you come to think that? Was it a professor? Was it a friend? Because we're not teenagers anymore. We have skin in the game now. If you don't understand that this place is your best bet, and if you're like me, it's your only bet, then you're not my people. But if you are like me, there are no other people who are your people, just your fellow Americans. If you're like me, you don't have dual citizenship, and there's nowhere else to escape to. If you're like me, it's America or bust. Nationalism and patriotism are one and the same, and they're good things. I'd stand on a table for mine, would you? Because if the left can turn your love for country into a four-letter word, they can turn your country into a byword. Don't let people turn your name into a four-letter word. Don't let that happen. Don't be that guy. No one can make you do that. You can only give in voluntarily. And so the only question left now is, will you? You tell me. Will you? Because I'll tell you, I won't. I'm not going anywhere. It's been said that those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. I'm determined that my fellow enjoyers will never fall into that number. And so anytime something big happens, you can expect me to ask, what does history say? History says we have reason to be concerned right about now about the situation in Iran and about its effect on the 2026 election. The similarities with the Iraq war are simple enough, but I think it's more interesting to talk about what's different. Here's what's different. In a single strike targeting 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities, Trump picked a better target and had more success hitting it than George W. Bush ever did while fighting the war in Iraq. And leading up to the Iraq war, we saw plenty of intelligence about Iraq nuclear facilities Turns out that was all fake. But these Iran facilities are as real as it gets. There's no lack of clarity about what those facilities are and what they're meant for. Iran itself admits that these are nuclear facilities. Iran has also enriched uranium beyond the levels needed to generate power from the nuclear energy. There's only one reason you do such a thing: when you're building bombs, not a power plant. In one airstrike, Trump hit more booty than America did in 20 years of fighting with Iraq. That's not nothing, but now we hear it's not enough, that bombs alone can't destroy Iran's nuclear program, that only a change in regime would stop a country who's dead set on obtaining nuclear weapons. You guys remember the war in Iraq? Of course you don't. You can thank the Vietnam draft for that, as it changed the face of war in America, possibly forevermore. Turns out the American people can tolerate a whole lot of warlike activity, so long as you don't demand that their boys who did not volunteer join in on the fighting. We were told 20 years ago that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and that the world would end if not for regime change. Well, we got regime change, and the world was and is no better for it. Iraq never had the weapons we claimed it did, and 20 years of blood and treasure were lost fighting a lie that never should have been believed. 20 years after George W. Bush flew a mission accomplished banner, we still have troops in Iraq. So, George, the mission wasn't accomplished. That's why nobody who voted for Trump is down for regime change. It's the Republican voter whose son was never the same after fighting in a foreign desert. It's the men J.D. Vance served alongside in the Marines who gave all to a war that only enriched the rich men north of Richmond. J.D. Vance's words, aired at the beginning of this podcast, are the most comforting thing to happen this weekend. If the Enjoyer podcast is about one basic thing, it's making sense of the world. What are we seeing? What about that dog that's not barking? What's the thing behind the thing? What does history say? If there's any relief, it's that J.D. Vance is in the room. The future won't be solely decided by an 80-year-old man who won't be here in a half decade. With J.D. Vance, the voice of the millennial, the generation that saw its country ripped away after 9/11, will be heard in the Trump White House, and thank God for that. I say all that to say, this war doesn't have to be like the last war, and it would behoove Trump and all the Republicans running in 2026 if it is not. Former Attorney General Mike Cox appeared on Kevin Rinke's podcast, Beyond the Echo. He talked about the difficulty of the 2006 midterm cycle, which came in the midst of the Iraq War.
In 2006, which in 2008 were really hard Republican years nationally and here in Michigan, because in 2006 we were starting to slide into the recession. The Iraq War was going on. And so the gubernatorial candidate lost and the Senate candidate lost. So again, I had to bring 300,000 people back. And those were primarily so many people who are now Trump voters.
So I hope Donald Trump knows what he's doing. I hope we're all praying for the president to have the wisdom that he needs right now. And I hope Donald Trump knows what he won't do, and that boots on the ground and regime change are on that list. But mostly, I hope this is the last time the word Iran is ever spoken on this podcast, except when it's Donald Trump saying, I ran off 50 million illegals, just like I promised, just like you voted for. Because if this war does go anything like the last war, next year will be a bloodbath for Republicans. And if we lose Michigan, we will lose it forever. In a future podcast, I'll talk about what we can learn from the last similar election, not the last election, the last similar election, which was 2018, the last time the governor's seat was open. But for now, I'll say this. If you're a Republican voter, prepare for life after Trump, because it's already here. You said you would crawl over glass to vote for the man. Will you do the same to save your state? And if you're a Republican candidate for office next year, don't stand too close to the president. His name will not appear on the ballot with you. There are no more coattails left to ride. No, you're going to need to make a Michigan-specific case to the people of Michigan. You'll find that you can't make too much noise squeezing a lame duck.